Question: are there any benefits for a game in choosing an 8-bit or pixel art style of graphics? I think so. It's more than just an arbitrary design choice. Axiom Verge's pixel graphics are best for this kind of ambiguous story. I think of modern pixel art as a kind of impressionism. In art, impressionism was about the subtleties of changes in light and movement, and I think there's a kind of subtlety which unrealistic pixel art maintains. Its images only outline and hint at the real descriptions of what the game is presenting. We're not seeing Trace in Axiom Verge as a human being. He's little more than an icon running around, and his dialogue portrait is similarly scaled down. This allows the player the freedom to cast their own ideas about what these characters truly look like and what they ultimately would resemble. Pixel art impressionism, if we're to call it anything at all, makes the suggestion that you can project your own ideas upon the comparably featureless visuals. You don't actually see in full disgust what Trace turns into when he mutates into a monster in the hallucination scene, but your imagination is able to fill in the gaps quickly and automatically. Working in tandem with the human imagination is something which pixel art throwbacks to 8-bit and 16-bit uniquely allows, rather than leaving no opportunity for it with the complete descriptions of HD graphics down to a character's hair follicles. Like the pixel art, the story of Axiom Verge is fairly ambiguous. Here's what I could piece together. After the lab accident, Trace is wounded, paralyzed, and blinded, but he's able to put together a new branch of theoretical physics that shocks and even repels the science community. His peers turn against his theories as too radical a departure from established science, remember Axiom Verge, and Trace is nicknamed Aphetos, from the Greek apheteo, which means without position or place. At some point, Trace Aphetos is able to figure out a way to cross the breach and travel to Sudra, a whole new world, probably using his own theories about physics. There he's apparently healed through any number of miraculous machines, and he discovers that there's an even greater civilization of technology beyond Sudra, wonders that could end famine, sickness, war, and death for humanity. However, it appears that the Sudran race believed that contact with that other civilization, whatever it is, was taboo. They actively prevented Aphetos from traveling to this other world through the breach, this barrier between themselves and the other worlds. The game does not describe how many years passed, but eventually the peaceful scientist that was Trace becomes the Aphetos that unleashes a pathogen on the Sudrans to wipe them out, all in order to obtain passage to that distant civilization, obtaining heaven by creating hell. Aphetos successfully kills all the inhabitants of Sudra and mutates variant clones of himself for his own private army, but he remains opposed by the Rusalkai, giant war machines and supercomputers. Elsnova, Ophelia, and Veruska fight Aphetos to a standstill, removing his protection against his own pathogen. To remain alive, Aphetos retreats to a special machine high in the Sudran atmosphere, using his breach attractor to bring the breach close enough to where the remaining Rusalkai cannot reach him without putting themselves at risk. He eliminates the remote drones that enable the Rusalkai's self-repair, and then it's just a matter of waiting it out, allowing the Rusalkai to degrade out of existence. The Rusalkai themselves hatch a plan to create a clone of the original Trace from the DNA that Aphetos first left in Sudra when he was healed by the egg pod. This younger copy of Trace would be a kinder, less sociopathic Aphetos, and the Rusalkai suspected they could bend this copy to their will. This is when Axiom Verge begins. The player plays as the copy of young Trace, who doesn't know he's a clone until later in the story, though he begins to develop a sense of violence that would later become the dominant trait of Aphetos. One of the harshest moments in the game comes when Trace realizes his origin. He witnesses firsthand what a failed clone of Aphetos looks like. He seems to recognize that he's being used by the Rusalki to destroy Aphetos, and he asks how they'll make him do what they want when he doesn't want to kill anyone. Elsnova promptly kills him by shutting down his functions remotely, and he wakes up in an egg pod rebirth chamber in excruciating pain. Realizing he has a choice between obedience and infinite torment, Trace agrees to confront Aphetos, saying he wants to talk with him and insisting that there be no killing. Elsnova agrees. Trace finally reaches a withered old Aphetos, but a battle is unavoidable. Trace succeeds in disabling the breach attractor, rendering Aphetos helpless and defenseless. With the Rusalki free, Elsnova immediately kills Athetos despite Trace's pleas. Trace is thanked for his service and returned to Earth the moment after the lab explosion, except now he has no injuries at all. Trace is thanked for his service and returned to Earth to the moment after the lab explosion, except now he has no injuries at all. Embittered, Trace becomes obsessed with learning about Sudra and figuring out all he can to try to return there. In the bad ending, Trace's obsession seems to be leading him down the path to become Athetos, in some kind of temporal loop that the Rusalki inadvertently created. However, the credits sequence shows Trace lying prone on what appears to be the body of a Rusalki. Is he dead? Is he only dreaming? The final ending, achievable by finding most of the game's items, finds Trace nearly at a breakthrough. He's close to finding a way to return to Sudra when his lab door swings open and Athetos fills the doorway. Athetos tells him that Trace cannot outrun himself and that it's time to wake up. Then he shoots him. The end! Have fun trying to shut your brain off at bedtime tonight. Overarching themes are interesting to me because it's easy to get caught up in the details and the theorizing of a game, whereas the narrative changes depending on whether the multiverse theory or the single timeline theory is factually true, if that's even capable of being discovered. Themes, on the other hand, describe the underlying ideas that the game presents. These are not as slippery as the details of Axiom Verge's vague storytelling. We might not know where the Athetos of the final ending came from or why he was there, but we do know that thematically he's an outcast fallen from grace because of his name and history. Trace seems so named because he's a trace of the human that Athetos once was. Is that even Athetos' real name? Was he ever called Trace? Or was that just something that the Rusalki came up with? Speaking of the Rusalki, I am quite confident that their feminine appearance isn't coincidental. Rusalka, alternatively spelled Rusalki or Rusalki, were female water spirits in Slavic folklore. They were occasionally connected with mermaids. Apparently, the concept of the Rusalki changed over time, where originally they were associated with fertility and the harvest. They were eventually viewed as spiteful entities, the unclean spirits of women who drowned themselves committing suicide. These latter Rusalki haunted the waters where they died and would lure young men into the depths by their beauty and by their voice, only to drown them. Some of them alternatively tickle men to death instead of drowning them, and I don't know which is worse. As for the Rusalki war machines in Axiom Verge, I think it's interesting that we're told Rusalki is Elsnova's name for themselves. They are feminine, and their gigantic mechanical bodies resemble marine animals, a huge eel, a lobster, a squid. The Rusalki initially seem like the innocent victims of Athetos, but as the game goes on you begin to see some of their ruthlessness and resentment. Elsnova hates Athetos and lies about killing him. In addition, she's willing to torture Trace, a young man, through repeated deaths in order to motivate him to do what she wants. The Rusalki may have been women who watched their world collapse as they stood by the rivers of Babylon and wept, but their past suffering doesn't give them the right to threaten Trace with suffering. So Athetos and the Rusalki both have skewed moral spheres. Athetos is willing to kill an entire population in order to obtain advanced technology for humanity, and the Rusalki are willing to torment Trace, their creation, their child, in order to force him to confront Athetos, disable the breach attractor so that the Rusalki can survive. In both cases, Trace's individuality is irrelevant. He's just playing a part as a deliberate pawn. If he had free will at all, his only choices would be between aiding a genocidal idealist or a race of selfish machines. Another theme I'd like to take note of is how this game handles fear. In the vein of the Metroid franchise, fear and horror are important for how Axiom Verge operates. I would say that there's a distinction to be made here though. A game like Super Metroid is frightening, but it's heroic and even adventurous at the same time. And the sense of fear comes from the scale of the unknown and Samus' loneliness. With Axiom Verge, there's no real sense of loneliness, as Trace remains in communication with Elsnova and the Rusalki throughout the story. However, there is a palpable sense of dread, much more significant than with Metroid. That's because in Metroid, we know that everything will turn out alright. We have our hero to see us through. But Trace is not a hero like Samus. He's a clone, a pawn, a device to be used and discarded. The further he gets involved in Sudra, the less convinced we are about what's going to happen. It's that sense of what might be waiting around the corner that really makes Axiom Verge a game about anxiety. That makes it all the more difficult to pick apart and get out of my head. Trying to analyze Axiom Verge is like trying to find the seam in an egg without breaking it. It'd be easy enough to just smash it open and lay out all the pieces and say, this is what it is, but you won't be able to discover what held it together by doing it that way. So you're stuck trying to get into a closed universe without knowing what you'll find inside. I don't know what this is, but it fills me with dread every time I see it.